Thank you so much for joining us for Leader to Leader again today. I see that we've got quite a few people chiming in the chat, and we always appreciate people starting out with introductions, so it lets us know kind of who's out there. And if you are new to Leader, if this is the first time you've joined us, at the bottom of your screen, you can see that you have a chat option, and that's where people are doing introductions. And then you'll see that you also have the opportunity for a Q&A. So we are going to have quite a few presenters today sharing information about the Michigan virtual resources that are available. And as our panelists do their presentation, if you have a question for them, go ahead and post that in the Q&A section. And then they may either answer you in writing or they may answer you verbally at the end. So if you just want to give a shout out or say hello to someone, you want to post that in the chat. But if you want to actually pose a question, you want to make sure that that goes in the Q&A. So I mentioned that we have a number of panelists with us today, and we just have a quick slide just so you know kind of who's coming up. We will be starting when we get going here with Jamie Fitzpatrick, the president of Michigan Virtual. A couple of other things we just want to touch on before we officially get started. I always like to remind you that all of these sessions are recorded. So today's webinar will be recorded and posted for public viewing, and they probably will be tweeted and put on social media as well. If you've missed any of our past Leader to Leader sessions, last week we had two really great sessions really focused on pupil accounting. So if you missed out on that one, you might want to go to our page and check out some of the previous Leader to Leader sessions that we have. The other thing that we just want to touch on, I mentioned in the Q&A section. So our next slide just kind of leads you through the fact that we use chat for chat and Q&A for Q&A. And at the end of this, we will have the slide deck and a recording. And if any of the presenters reference various resources, we'll make sure that those links are added to the web page as well. So we are just going to go ahead and jump right in to our presenters. And, you know, MASSP has been so fortunate that we have had a great partnership with Michigan Virtual. And when the pandemic started, we immediately started kind of having conversations about what are the needs of the field and, you know, what organization can best support, you know, the field on various components of it. And Michigan Virtual has been incredibly responsive. You know, throughout the time that this has been going on, there's just been such a need for professional development and, you know, even things like what LMS do we use? You know, what decisions should we be thinking about? How can we crowdsource resources? And they've just really answered so many of the needs that we have in the field. So I'm excited for the team to be here to be able to explain those. And Jamie, I just want to thank you for your partnership, your responsiveness, and really for the work of you and your team, which really has been outstanding.
Oh, thank you, Wendy. It's a pleasure to be here and share some of the information that we can provide and support resources. We're going to break up the presentation into a couple of different pieces. I'm going to give kind of a high-level overview of everything we've done as an organization to support Michigan schools. And one of those elements is a learning continuity work group that we've created, and we've got the co-chair here today with some of the subcommittee chairs. But to really give an overview of what we've done and then step into what the work group has helped us to do in terms of creating resources for schools. So Dave, if you're driving, if you want to put up so here's our agenda. I'll go through that. And then if we go to the next slide.
Yeah, I apologize, Jamie. It is, it's not advancing like I would hope it would. So let me do this real quick. I'm going to take it out of that mode and do this. Can you see that screen, Jamie?
It's pretty small, but it'll do.
I think, David, if you present and then click back on it, it will start advancing for you.
Okay.
Yeah, there we go. So the first thing I'm going to do is, I believe Colin has a link to this document. I just broke it up into 2 different slides, but just going to walk through the things that we've done at a high level, and then I'll turn it over to Dave Richards, who can introduce the subcommittee chairs that we have with us from the Learning Continuity Work Group. So the first thing that we started to do very early on when COVID hit the state is recognize that a lot of schools, teachers, administrators really haven't been planning for anything like this. And so we started to put together some rubrics and templates and planning guides and checklists. And you'll see when you get a link to this document, you can see that there are hyperlinks embedded into that first and all of these resources. So that was just an effort to try to help introduce some of the key things that school leaders would probably want to try to pay attention to and begin recognizing as challenges going forward. Obviously, this was kind of like hitting a train head on pretty quickly. Wendy talked about our professional development activities from March 1st, and you can see this is dated July 27th in the upper right-hand corner, but from March 1st to yesterday, we have delivered 106,000 online professional development enrollments for teachers. I have to tell you, we've just been floored at the way teachers have recognized they need to continue to improve their skills, and many are coming to our portal to look at strategies on how to teach in a remote environment. I will say that those 100 plus thousand enrollments have generated close to 170,000 sketches, and we learned last week that the number of sketches that we provided from March 1st to July 13th represented about 35% of all sketches that were issued by the Department of Ed. In April, we also dipped into our statewide catalog of courses, and many of you know we don't own 100% of our digital content, but for those courses where we had 100% ownership of our intellectual property, which ended up being a little over 70 courses, we took those courses and put them out on a web platform. So if you were in the Thumb and you were teaching earth science on Monday and school got closed on Tuesday, you could literally take that earth science course minus the assessments and the practice opportunities and use that digital content with your students to teach earth science. We're going to continue to make that resource available for the entire 2021 school year. And we also have a product called EdReady, which is a diagnostic tool that works with grades 4 through 12 in the area of math and 8 through 12 in the area of English. Dave will talk about the work group. So Dave, if you could flip to the next portion of this page. One of the fun things that I think we did is creating an online learning community. So we have about 3,700 teachers, educators, administrators who have joined the Facebook group called Keep Michigan Learning. And I've been just kind of monitoring this. It really is interesting to see people ask questions that need answers. My district is thinking about going in this direction. Has anybody else done that? And 5, 10, 15 people will respond, or somebody is wanting to share their expertise in a particular topic. So I would encourage you to share that resource with your colleagues. About 2 weeks ago, we started some virtual office hours, and this is new for us. We don't know how this is going to be responded to from the field, but we know that a lot of teachers are wanting to privately ask questions about how do I do certain things, whether it's using a particular technology tool or an instructional design strategy. And so we're allowing teachers to sign up for private sessions with one of our veteran online teachers or one of our instructional designers to just basically do kind of a Q&A back and forth support session, again, at no cost. I think many of you know we've pushed out a webinar series. I think we've got a series of 14, and that number continues to grow on a wide variety of topics related to best practices, tips, and tricks. I'm particularly proud of what we've done in the mental health, social, emotional realm. I think we almost look like geniuses now, because last fall late, we had partnered with the Michigan Department of Education, and we had created a series of 5 online courses for teachers in the SEL space. Each one of these is worth, I think, around 5 sketches, and that's being consumed at a pretty remarkable rate. But we also have made and launched this program we call Michigan Cares, which previously had been a paid subscription service. We got some additional support from the state to allow us to make this available to all schools for free. And I think the one thing that makes the Michigan Cares program unique is that this is a service you can access from a computer, a tablet, a mobile device, but it serves students, parents, and teachers. And so all 3 of those audiences are addressed when you look at these free resources, and there's well over 500 lessons that deal with mental health. And then recently we created a blog for parents how to parent during a pandemic. And we're relying on the expertise of Lauren Kazee, who I think many of you know is an expert in the mental health SEL space. And then we did something kind of fun. We realized that this spring, the state was actually living through a giant experiment with everybody being away from school. And we thought it was a good time for us to try to study what was happening. And we engaged a partner of ours, Sundberg Farrar, which is an internationally recognized design firm. And these are people who use design thinking, which is a formal methodology of problem solving to help do some qualitative research. And so they engaged with us to schedule and conduct 17 focus groups with parents, teachers, administrators, technology folks, to really just try to listen for the good, the bad, and the ugly. And these were all kind of personal stories. And so it was really trying to capture the voice. We had pretty good representation geographically around the state. And what that qualitative research is helping us to do is to create some hypotheses. And we heard some really interesting things, like some teachers were saying they were actually seeing an improvement in some of their student writing. And then we were trying to hypothesize, why would that be? Well, student interruptions sometimes can be an issue. And so what we're trying to do right now is take the research. We've created a set of hypotheses to try to figure out how we might go about doing some prototyping. In this research, all the voices kind of came through in 4 core areas. The social emotional learning was a huge bucket. The pedagogy, the technology was another bucket, and the equity. But we're trying to kind of sift to the top the things that seem to be most pertinent statewide with every group. And it seems like 2 kind of surface to the top. One is the role of the teacher. We know many districts are asking their teachers to start developing their own content and take on that role in addition to what they have traditionally done in a classroom environment. Other districts are trying to figure out how they bring in digital resources and ask their teachers to play more of a role of working on the relationship and providing feedback. But that whole role of a teacher, we think that is pivoting right now. And there's more work we could be doing to prototype some different models. And then the whole student motivation. One of the questions was asked of the kids, well, now that grades are no longer an issue, why are you working hard? Why are you not working hard? And the motivators were really intriguing in listening to those stories. And so we're trying to figure out what new models might we work with some partnering districts to look at prototyping some things. So we're probably a week or 2 away from seeing a white paper that we jointly will publish with Sundberg Farrar that will kind of give the tip of the iceberg and identify opportunities for engagement if those around the state want to engage with us. And then the last thing I will say before I turn it over to Dave Richards is we know that web accessibility is a huge issue, especially for students with disability, with some kind of a disability. And we know there are many teachers out there doing heroic things to create new resources. Sometimes they're not paying as much attention to web accessibility as maybe they could or they should. It could be a lack of awareness. It could be a lack of a skill. They don't know how to close caption something. They don't know the color contrast issue with somebody who's got some visual impairments. And there are a lot of incredible resources that are going to be published, and unfortunately, they're not going to be web accessible. So we pulled together just a really incredible collection of resources that help to give some guidance and direction around web accessibility, especially for kids with disabilities. And then I will pause there, turn it over to Dave Richards, who is the former superintendent of Fraser Public Schools, who serves as one of the 2 co-chairs for our Learning Continuity Work Group. The other co-chair is John Van Wagener, the relatively new superintendent of Traverse City Public Schools, who wasn't able to join us today. And Dave, I'll let you introduce the subcommittee members.
Thank you, Jamie. Appreciate the opportunity, first of all, to connect and share the work that we've been doing as a work group. The 3 co-chairs, I'm very proud to have the opportunity to work with them. Dr. Sarah Pazer, who is the Director of School Leadership at Flex Tech Academy, Monique Uzelac, who's the Director of WAVE in Washington ISD, and then Ben Gilpin, who I think many of you know, Principal at Warner Elementary in Western School District, and just have grown as friends as well as colleagues as we've gone through this process. As Jamie mentioned in the beginning, when Michigan Virtual started to have a conversation about who do we need to get together to talk about developing a deeper understanding of the challenges facing educators in the field, we developed a list of people that we thought, boy, wouldn't it be great if we could get some of the best thinkers around online learning and innovation into the same space and start talking through what are the issues and how do we provide the field with support. And so through that effort, we've gathered about 25 classroom teachers, building administrators, and district leaders to come together and start problem solving and talking about what are the issues and what are you hearing from your friends? What are you hearing from your parents, from students? And what could we best use our talents and abilities to provide resources for our colleagues? Through that conversation, and this is just kind of a quick review of it, but through that conversation, we really came down to 3 areas that emerged that required some in-depth research in addition to the Sundberg for our work that Jamie mentioned. And it really was around the wrestling match of our district doesn't have an LMS. Where do we go from here? How do we make these decisions? We're really struggling with helping our teachers transition to an online environment. We have fantastic traditional face-to-face skills, tools, kits, but we need some more support in regards to the online component. And then the third one was, where do we find content that is has the rigor, has kind of gone through a review process, and where will that information be stored so that it's easily found? And so Sarah, Ben, and Monique are actually going to walk you through the work of each one of those subgroups that they've chaired. And I'm going to hand it off to Sarah, and she's going to talk about the LMS piece for all of us right now. Sarah?
Thank you so much, Dave, and thank you for having me here today. It's an honor to represent my subcommittee and all of the hard work that we put in to create this resource. So we're excited to share that with you today. As Dave mentioned, one of those primary needs that emerged when we went from classroom to cloud overnight was the need for a learning management system solution. And districts were at various stages in that process, but you can imagine under the pressure of emergency remote instruction, individuals who had never had a learning management system in place all of a sudden realized, wow, we really need to do something. So we wanted to create a resource that could sort of cater to people that are a little bit further along in the process and ready to make a choice, and then those that are starting from scratch. So ultimately, we tried to simplify that process so that you could choose a right fit for your district. Before I kind of go into the tool itself, I wanted to shout out the team. I mean, we had such an all-star lineup of individuals in this group. And what I loved about this group was that we had representation from different levels of experience with LMSs. So we had kind of the veteran LMS user and the expert maybe at the central office level, and then we had novice users who are just starting out and don't have a lot of background knowledge for sort of what to look for a good LMS. We had teachers, we had principals, we had district leaders. So I was excited to be able to capture all of those perspectives and voices in this tool, and I hope that you'll be able to see that we were really empathetic towards these different constituents. And we were even able to kind of use some of the research that we found out from the Sundberg for our partnership. So we were able to get some student and parent perspectives too. Our collaboration and process, what we did was we would just kind of put our heads together in the beginning and asked a lot of questions. So we kind of started, cast our net pretty wide and started with, what are those essentials of a right fit LMS? What does it look like to make a mission-driven decision that really honors your vision for high-quality instruction for your unique district? What are those best practices for a request for proposals so you're getting the most cost-effective solution for your district? And then where can you turn if you have specific questions about specific LMSs once you've narrowed down your options? So once we did that, we sort of synthesized all of that information into 3 tools. If you go to the website, you'll see our guide to selecting an LMS for K-12 includes an LMS self-assessment. So that is kind of helping you understand if now is the right time to make that decision and what are the things you need to put in place before you pull the trigger and make a choice. The second thing we did was we created an LMS decision-making matrix. So these were, this is a tool where we took sort of those essential components of LMSs and what you needed to look for to make the right choice. And then that last, the step 3 LMS directory, this was about looking at some of the most popular LMS solutions that are out there and how they compare. I'm going to dig in a little bit to that self-assessment, and through our discussions in the beginning, this was really important to us to help districts make that right choice. And part of that is really understanding if the timing is right. Do you have the right people on your committee so that you're capturing all the right voices before you make the decision? So this self-assessment was very important to us. At the next slide, you'll sort of see part of that included kind of demystifying a lot of the technical jargon that is part of the LMS world. We tried to define terms that, the novice user might not understand. So we looked at, SCORM and interoperability, and we wanted to remove any sort of logistical barriers or technical jargon that might get in the way of you making the right choice. And then we also wanted to provide some good, sound decision-making principles so that, no matter what, you had a good process in place. Our next step was to create that matrix. So we looked at what are those essential things that people needed to consider before they made the investment. And we emphasized the fact that the learning management system needs to, it's just the tool, right? The vision for high quality instruction, your vision for teaching and learning really needs to drive that choice, because the learning management system is just the vehicle to help you get to that vision. So we wanted to put that first and foremost at the top of the process. So ultimately, what we decided is that we wanted to build districts' capacity to make the right choice for them. So we really wanted to focus more on how you can make that right choice, not endorsing a specific LMS or telling you which one to choose. So we wanted to teach districts to fish, ultimately. The last component of our toolkit is a directory. So we do understand that, some districts are pretty far along in the process, and maybe they've narrowed down their choices, to their top 2 or 3. And so we wanted to make sure that we could connect districts with actual users to get that feedback, really, specific feedback about their needs so that they're making the right choice. So we looked at some of the most popular systems. So if you go to the website, we do have a grid that kind of compares the features of each of the front runners right now. And then we also, it's an iterative process, so we're gonna still revise this section so that we can actually connect you with specific users in the field and vendors that can give you kind of that real-time feedback. To summarize the process and sort of our tool, I think what we wanna make sure that districts understand is that you have to avoid the quick fix trap. Like I said, I think, under these circumstances, it can be really tempting to try to, select an LMS as a stopgap to try to solve some of the issues that you have with, cohesion and connectivity. But we really want to urge you to be methodical with your process and always keep your instructional vision at the forefront. And then understand that throughout implementation of a new LMS, you have to stay the course, because you are going to run into some roadblocks, and not to give in to those difficulties and sort of jump ship and go with a different solution. So really investing in your users and providing that professional development and the resources for all the stakeholders so that you can kind of realize the full potential of your LMS. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Monique Uzlak, who's the Program Director for Washtenaw Alliance for Virtual Education.
Thanks, Sarah. Our staff was actually in the middle of picking a new LMS when we finished up that part of the project, and has come back to the matrix part just to check our own decision-making multiple times. So it's been kind of a helpful tool. The professional learning group, well, we sat down at our first meeting and wanted to think about what are the professional learning needs for staff to transition in this to a high quality remote learning environment, with a little bit of focus on kind of, we've got an emergency situation, but we also want to be looking ahead for kind of good practice going forward. Go ahead, Dave. Our team also had people in multiple different roles, a lot of kind of deep thinkers who actually have been thinking a lot about how professional learning, both in their districts or across regions, work, and where, noticing where some of those gaps were. So we too were asking ourselves a lot of questions. After that first meeting, we sat down and thought, oh boy, professional learning. The scope here was not to do a teacher college model, but we wanted to think, how do we help staff remember that they still know what they know, right? It's a new delivery method. It's not all new learning. So we spent some time thinking about what are the priority areas to prepare teaching staff for online instructional models. Where are those gaps? Where are the things where they're likely to feel comfortable, and where do they need practice versus additional information and kind of deeper learning? Also wanted to recognize the fact that we've got, districts who have been doing some level of online learning or, technology-rich environments, and we have teachers who might be still using paper gradebooks across the state. So we wanted to make sure that we were talking about how is that individualized as well. The other thing we wanted to prioritize, because we know it's a constraint for districts, is free resources. So there's already a number of vetted professional development opportunities from Michigan Virtual, REMC, and others that we wanted to prioritize putting into this playlist. So the priority areas that we identified kind of going into this emergency situation were culture, equity, and relationships, instructional design skills, technical skills, and providing accommodations to students in need. So these priority areas that we identified map to a subset of the national quality standards for online teaching. But we also wanted to recognize that the goal across the state wasn't necessarily for every teacher to be an online teacher, but that when possible, we would be looking at a return to face-to-face instruction. So what were those most important skills to focus on and kind of outline some professional development around? So the tool is pretty straightforward. A bit of an introduction here, kind of talking again about the gaps that some staff feel in their skill around remote teaching as we've dove into COVID-19 and for some of us going into fall. Go ahead, Dave. Move this forward. Basically, what you're seeing here is a teacher self-assessment checklist. So, for instance, under culture, equity, and relationships, we've broken that down to communications, relationships in a digital space, relationships in a digital space around formal and informal connections, check-in strategies. So the teacher's going to go through, or building leader, and say, I use multiple strategies to assess the mental, social, emotional, and academic professional well-being of my students while communicating in a digital space. I'm comfortable with that. I'm going to check that. I use multiple strategies to assess the success of collaboration with colleagues while communicating in a digital space. But some of this is a lot about collaboration and what is leading in an online space and what does teacher collaboration look like. And a lot of it is also around kind of those relationships and interactions with students in the online space. Jumping down to the instructional design, I use synchronous and asynchronous methods of delivery as appropriate. I can create learning material for asynchronous learners. I design my lessons using standard format, similar to what other teachers are using, etc. So you're going through making this, clicking off the piece, clicking the areas that teacher is comfortable, and what then comes up is a personalized list of professional development. Everything from recorded webinars to presentations to instructor-led courses or self-paced courses. The granularity is not at a level where each subsection of those is identified, because most of these courses or will actually touch on many of the subsections in each kind of major area. But what it does do is give you a guide for actually figuring out where is some free, high quality, already vetted professional development that our staff can use or that our professional learning community can use going forward. So the biggest takeaways here is that we knew districts needed a way to individualize this approach so that teachers who had a lot of technical skill or a lot of experience doing some instructional design but needed help with those relationships could identify that, or vice versa. We knew the priority was that free course options were helpful for districts. And then as we moved through this program, through the committee, we realized we were missing some pretty important topics, especially as summer progressed, around equity and social justice. And Jamie and his team have also been having some conversations about this and are looking to start adding in some more content that would relate to those areas. I will hand things over to Ben Gilpin. The content.
Hey, well, yep. Thanks, Monique. Hey, everybody. Happy Wednesday. Hopefully your days are going well. I know if they're anything like mine, you've got plenty going on. Just had a staff meeting this morning, so you can imagine where my head is. Real quick, I just want to do a quick little shout out to our team that was dealing with the repository or the resources. So as you can see, and what I would hope that you notice is a variety of different titles, also a variety of different places that they come from across the state. I was really, really impressed with this team because, as I stated earlier, there's a variety of titles, but it was never about titles. It was always about how can we make education better. And when you take the egos and you throw them out the door and you just say that we're all in this together, that's a pretty powerful thing. Special shout out to John Van Wagner. As the go-to for me, early on we were looking at, is this about resources? Is this about vetting? I mean, what exactly was the specific direction? And John was fantastic. So just a quick shout out to him. So here's the what and the why. What we discovered and what we talked about quite a bit is we would start off as a full group. There's roughly about 30 of us, and we would talk through what's going on. This was back in April, how our district's adjusting. And there was this gigantic hole that we saw where everybody's inboxes were getting flooded. They were getting flooded with all these free resources that companies were saying, you can use this and you can use this. But there wasn't a spot where teachers, specifically teachers, could go to and say, this is what I need. This is my content area. And so that started off with our why. And then we really ultimately shifted to wanting to create this fluid repository that allowed educators to share content, but also be able to find content that could support the learning. And so at that point, we started really working towards what is this repository going to look like? And it's important for me to say that we had a lot of discussions about developing resources or putting the resources out there versus vetting the resources. And as a group, we had some very healthy discussion about, we didn't want people to feel as though we were the keepers of all information. We wanted to put it out there and let others be the decision makers, to empower people to make those decisions. And so that's ultimately where the goal was. So to narrow the focus a little bit, we were putting out these resources that people could immediately use and share and trust. And there was that repository versus vetting piece that I earlier mentioned. And then we ultimately came to this one-stop shop, so to speak, where people could go to a site, which you're going to see here in just a second with a screenshot. They're going to go to a site and they're going to be able to put in their criteria, and it's going to give them a list of resources that can help them in the classroom or in their own prospective schools. As far as what was missing, this came on as we were developing it. We wanted there to be a tie or a connection to strong pedagogy. We didn't want it to be, here's a resource, put a kid in front of a tablet and let them go. We really wanted to tie to that pedagogy piece. And through lots of, again, healthy discussion, we tied it with universal design for learning, which you're going to see here in a moment as well. Go for it, Dave. Squirrel. So as sessions began, we did face some struggles. We talked through some of those struggles. One of the struggles that we faced, and I think a lot of you can probably relate to this, is we didn't want to have to reinvent the wheel. We knew that there were already resources out there. So what could we go to and use and not feel like we're starting from scratch? And one of those resources, as you can see, there's a link on here, and you'll get this later, is the Go Open Michigan resource. And there was several of our group members, including from the Department of Education, Anne Marie, she was instrumental in putting Go Open Michigan together. And we wanted to utilize that site so we weren't recreating the wheel. And I think we've all been there before. Work smarter, not harder. We also leaned heavily on the digital strengths of Nikki Herta. So Nikki is a member of Michigan Virtual, but her design of the landing page and the ease of use was critical, as you'll see here in the next slide. So when you go to the repository, when you have a teacher that's potentially looking for resources, or you're looking for resources yourself, you land on this page right here, and there's a few things that you can see. Number one, there's that connection to the pedagogy, and there's a PDF that follows. And then there's the other piece where you can actually submit a resource. And this is an empowering piece that we want this to be very fluid and constantly updated. So as team members, we are going to be in there quite frequently, basically checking the work that people are then submitting as a resource. Go for it, Dave. Yep. And then the next page, as you would click on another one, as you can see on the right-hand side, there's a subject column. There's also a cost and a price. There's grade levels. They connect to the Common Core. What LMS are you using? So you can put in your criteria, and as you put in the criteria, it's then going to give you a list of resources that meet that criteria. Here's an example in front of you, the National Geographic Classroom Resources. You can see the resource type, you can see the grade level, the subject area, you can see the price, you can learn more about it, or you can click the Go to Resource and go right directly to that website. As you can see, if you're an educator, this can be extremely valuable because it's a one-stop shop. And then this is the critical piece where we continue to have this ongoing. We didn't want, and Sarah mentioned this earlier, we don't want a quick fix. We want something, we want to help educators with something that's going to hold up for years, for the test of time, hopefully. And this is where that submitting a resource comes in, because we know that resources are going to be constantly changed, tweaked, created, developed. And so this is a spot where if you're an educator that knows of a resource that we don't necessarily have in the repository, you can submit it for other people to be able to check out and to be able to use. Because as educators, we're constantly trying to help each other. And that's the collaborative piece that we all do. And that's why we're great at what we do. And then the final takeaways, as I've mentioned a couple times, being fluid, constantly updated, empowering educators, and really connecting that pedagogical piece was a high priority. We didn't want to just give people a site and say, here's a site, go play with it. We wanted to really connect to what they're doing in the classroom as they're trying to help their kids be the best learners possible.
Awesome. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Sarah and Monique. As a group, I will just say, first and foremost, we believe that what has been developed is a great starting point. By no means is it the end and the all-inclusive, which leads us to our next question, actually for the attendees, the participants today, is if you would, in the chat box, we're looking for ideas on how to take this talented group of educators and put on to the next task. What's the next thing that we should be thinking about? What are some problems that you would like to have us processing through and developing answers or possible solutions for? If you would, please put into the chat box, what are your suggestions for future work for this group? We're going to continue working with the matrix. We've seen a lot of activity and a lot of traction around the LMS piece. There's a lot of conversations, and I know Colin has had a lot of conversations in regards to helping districts navigate LMS choices, what's out there. There's a lot of development happening with different products around the state. How do we get closer to that so that people can make decisions that are intentional? They understand the cost, they understand the long-term commitment with those. Same thing with professional learning. We truly are getting to the point where we have to customize how professional learning happens for all staff members. Who is providing that professional learning? What's available? What's the cost to do that? And how do we scale that across the state so that we have consistency common language in the work. We're all trying to solve many of the same problems today. So how do we collaborate and develop that thought leadership component as well? And then obviously, when it comes to the content, the vendor side of it, there's a lot of conversation about who's providing the right content for us, who's vetting it, who's spending the time and resource doing that. Instead of all of us doing that individually, how do we come together and look at resources across the state? Again, there's such a different ask of us from society in regards to learning. And so for our work group, we're looking at what's that next challenge for us? What's that next thing that we could put our talent to helping and supporting the field? So if you have anything, whether it's now or if you want to email any of us, feel free. If you want to put it into the chat room, that would be fantastic as well. And also, if there's no questions, I don't believe, Colin, in the Q&A box. But if there are any questions, whether it's now or later, please feel free to reach out. This really was a quick overview of the site. If you have the opportunity to crawl through the keepmichiganlearning.org website, test the self-assessment tool, have your staff members go in there, let them take a look at their own possible needs and interests. Same thing with the assessment or the LMS assessment tool. Again, great resources. And then if anyone's looking for additional online content, that would be a great place to start as well. Just back to the panelists, Sarah, Ben, Monique, is there anything that you would want to add that maybe as a follow-up from the work group and or your subject area, your content area?
Dave, if I could just jump in real quick, I think one thing that I would want to say to everyone, your community has probably done some type of survey about back to school from families, staff, whatever it might happen to be. If there was one thing that I would really suggest, checking out that Sundberg-Farrar research, that will definitely change your perspective. It will absolutely add to your depth of knowledge. I can only speak for myself, but listening to David talk about the research week in and week out was fascinating and gave me a broader picture of what families and specifically students were feeling during this. And it's so critical that we know how the students are feeling and we're able to empathize. So if there's only one thing you do, I would really hope that you would check out that summary.
That's a great suggestion. Monique, did you have anything?
I think, I don't know that we captured it, but we spent a lot of time in the group talking about the needs of school leaders as well. And just remembering that you also know what you know. And even though it's a different medium, how you make relationships with staff, how you encourage collaboration among staff, and how you're reaching out and supporting families. Those are all things that really are transferable skills. I don't know that we talked about that so much.
Yeah, thank you. And Sarah?
Sure. One of the things that we continue to think about are different LMS solutions that aren't the most popular. So some of those more like niche kind of options. One of the things we wanted to do was provide people testimonies of some of these other options. So if you are somebody who is, using an LMS that you're really happy with and would like to sort of provide testimony or connect with someone who's looking for something, we would love to hear your voice. So if you have, a quick chance to email me and just let me know kind of what LMS you're using and what makes you happy with it, I would love to hear from you.
Thank you. Jamie, one of the questions in the chat box has just been about the traffic on the Keep Michigan Learning site. Does your team have any analytics in regards to visitors or page visits, things like that?
Yeah, I'm sure they do. I just don't have that information in front of me. But yeah, we do a pretty good job of kind of monitoring the traffic. And I bet you they probably even have some analytics on the Keep Michigan Learning Facebook page in terms of, how active that thread is.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Colin, I want to, on behalf of the work group and obviously the Michigan Virtual team, just say thank you for the opportunity to share this work and just the opportunity to collaborate with MASSP and the partnership, to be able to connect with the field and support in any way possible. That it's been something we've all been looking forward to have this chance to do this webinar with you guys. Jamie?
I wanted to add on something that I think Sarah and Monique said about the importance of team building and the relationship aspect. I didn't mention it because it wasn't one of our higher profile activities, but as an organization, we've been working virtually for 20 years, and you team build differently in a virtual environment than you do in a physical environment. And so we have put together some really fun resources that are on our website that are just all about how do leaders think about building team, keeping them engaged as employees in an environment that most of us don't have a lot of experience with. So I would encourage you to check those resources out.
Yeah. We appreciate your leadership on this, Jamie, over the last 20-some years. I've known you and worked with you since I first became a high school principal back in Mattawan, and the resources you provided, the services you give, and the counsel you give are very much, as a practitioner, as a leader, very much appreciated. For the rest of you to give up your afternoon to be here, plus the prep work you did ahead of time in organizing, researching, planning, designing, and pulling this together. Such a monumental task in a short period of time. It reflects your commitment to education and the work that we do to service our schools and communities. So thank you for your leadership. Thank you for bringing forward such a strong repository of resources and tools that we can use as an organization, as individual districts, as building leaders in order to serve those people. What you've done is just incredible, and we're super proud to be partnered with you in this effort.
Thank you.
As we move forward, just know that we have another Leader to Leader tomorrow, and tomorrow's Leader to Leader will build on what came from the resources today and connect back to then the roadmaps and the preparedness plans that GELN has been putting together. And so John Kraus with Tom Livesey from Oak Ridge School and Jason McGoy will be with us to help walk through these plans and how their district used the plan and the resources both from Michigan Virtual and from the GELN to put together their preparedness plan. And they'll be sharing the thinking and their approach, as well as how they dealt with the governance, communication, and marketing of those and messaging of those things as we go. So we look forward to seeing you tomorrow at 1 o'clock for that one. And then also know that next week, August 6th, from 9 to 11:30, we have our first paid webinar. And that one's, we have a national speaker coming to talk about closing the pandemic-related achievement gaps. What can we be doing locally within our schools to service those students who have been challenged through this remote learning experience during the pandemic. And so we're looking forward to having people join us on that one as well. So with that, thank you all for joining us. We wish you well this afternoon and into the future, knowing the real work of implementation and progress monitoring will keep us busy in the foreseeable future. So thank you all for being with us today.